Hello. So thank you those of you who jumped in early and already are here. Just drinking my coffee while it's still warm. I'm glad that the stuff on the channel has been helpful. Let me just swing around and grab my water. While I was sitting waiting to go live, I was busy flicking through my books, as I often do. So that meant my water's in the wrong place. And my other chair's in the wrong place. So, those of you who obviously perhaps aren't subscribed, if you find this interesting or want to check anything else out of mine and decide you want to subscribe, feel free to. If you find this interesting or helpful, I don't know what we're going to do yet or talk about yet. We'll see where the conversation goes. Then feel free to give it a thumbs up. So, I think this is the 25th one of these I've done in a row, sort of live stream, that is, minus Abby's birthday. I didn't do one on Abby's birthday, but I've done 25 excluding Abby's birthday, all in a row. Yeah, tonight at 4 a.m. UK time is when the next a $30 book. That's cheap. At least when I buy books. Tomorrow, it is Friday today, I think. So Saturday morning at 4 a.m. is when the this week's sound effects sleep meditation goes live. So this week's one is Daddy and Daughter's Fishing Trip, which is again a story from 2018, from when I did my 40 stories for my 40th birthday, which I would never repeat, because that was very difficult to do. So yeah, the Daddy and Daughter's Fishing Trip one is where they go off on a fishing trip and then they go for a little meal out on a riverbank at like a little restaurant on a riverbank, and then they head back to the lake they started in, have themselves something to eat by a campfire before heading home to bed. So yeah, I would put the vet's bills obviously ahead of books. So yeah, so hello to everyone who's popping over here. I've not counted the hours of live streams. I've not paid any attention. But 26 days ago, I did it was a Monday, I think, and I did the sleep story one for that Monday night. And then that was a long session. I think that went on into, what time is it here? 7:30 p.m. So 7:30 in the evening. So yes, that Monday night one went on until gone midnight, and then I did one on the a sort of a normal kind of like just a chat on the Tuesday, and the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, another sleep meditation making one on the Monday again, and then I did the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, focusing on autism because I think it was Autism Awareness Week, and then did the Monday night again, doing another sleep meditation one, and then did Tuesday, Wednesday, I don't know, whatever day was Abby's birthday. I didn't do. No, that week was I did Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, doing the reading my Hypnotic Assassin novel, and then I did normal kind of stream again on the Saturday, Sunday. Monday night I did the sleep meditation stream, and then the Tuesday I did another one of these streams. Wednesday I think was Abby's birthday. Thursday, Friday I've been doing these streams again. So yeah, so it's over 26 days I've done 25 streams. So that's quite a few back to back, as well as obviously having my usual videos going up twice a week that I've been editing and posting. Well, they're only as interesting as the questions people ask. Yeah, I did nearly forget my own book. But at least the more extreme violence part. What gets me is that my channel is based predominantly on storytelling of some kind or another, admittedly on sleep-based storytelling, not eyeballs hanging out storytelling. But yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, murder. But yeah, but those videos have had so many people unsubscribe for some reason, and I naturally assumed, maybe naively, I can't do ventriloquism. But I used to spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, like every teenage boy, standing in front of the mirror doing ventriloquism, because no friends. So yeah, so I naturally kind of naively assumed that even though they're not sleep stories, I thought, oh, people would be more than happy to hear me reading my own novel over 4 sessions. Turns out it generates a lot of unsubscribes, not a lot of dislikes particularly, and I don't think there was many negative comments or anything, but it definitely led to a lot of people unsubscribing kind of continuously. So it's not like lots of people just unsubscribed on the first day. Yeah, I've done 2 videos two videos that I think are on YouTube, hypnotizing myself using ventriloquism, and then I shared one on Facebook because it showed up on my on this day X number of years ago. You posted something, so I shared a video that I'd posted 11 years ago on Facebook of me waiting for a video to I'm sitting in front of my computer and I'm waiting for a video to process, and while I'm waiting for it to process, I've got the microphone in my hand still, so I'm messing around with the microphone. But I used to kind of find it amusing to be at events where people are kind of checking that the mics all work, and you kind of go, "Hello, I don't think it's working. There seems to be a delay," and you just sort of make people start thinking their equipment's broken. So I would find it amusing. I don't know so much about others. No, I won't move the videos off my channel. I just found it interesting that I naturally assumed that, given that people listen to me tell stories, that if I'm saying I'm going to be telling a story that I actually, obviously all of them I've created. I haven't written them, but I've created them, either with your help, coming up with ideas, and I just string it together somehow, or from within me. But I thought, who wouldn't want to just hear a a novel that I've written, and me reading that novel, because the difference between a novel and my sleep stories, my sleep meditation stuff, is obviously the novel has characters in it, with each character having a name. Each character is a certain type of person, including the main character. There's locations that I use, etc. There's kind of what makes a story that you're following along to, as opposed to falling asleep to, a story. Whereas don't really do that in the sleep meditations, because the last thing I want is people to have too much to kind of have to follow along to um, during a sleep meditation. You don't. It's one thing occasionally giving the main character a name or something, um, but if you start giving lots of characters names, and potentially the story could be, say, an hour long or an hour and a half long or whatever, all of a sudden you've got something that people have to try and fight. If you've dozed off partway through, so you kind of zone out and then you zone back in again, you might think, I've absolutely no idea who this character is, what their name is, or I've now been told their name, but I don't know, are they good, are they bad, what's going on here? Um, so yeah, let me have a look. What comments? Yeah, obviously I can understand some people might find it a bit violent, but I did say, obviously in each one, that there's violence in it, and I tried. Obviously, once it got to where it was going to get more violent, um, it kind of gives it away right from the first page. But yeah, once it got to actual physical violence rather than just someone collapsing, having a heart attack, um, I did obviously kind of try and say, today there might be a bit of um, violence and blood and stuff, and it's all told in a very blunt, matter of fact kind of way. Um, just having a look, see what people have written. Yeah, so that's what this teenage boy did. Spent all my time in front of mirrors, shuffling cards and trying to make cards change from one card to another, um, trying to move my eyebrows and my ears and stuff, and getting used to that so that I could try and learn how to appear to display different emotions on my face, so that when people spoke to me, I could try and think, what emotion are they wanting me to think? Yeah, what do they kind of want me to look like I've got? Do they want me to look like I care? Do they want me to look like I'm finding what they've said engaging or amusing? Do they want me to look like I've found what they've said shocking or surprising? So I'd have to learn all the different facial expressions, and then I'd have to learn how to move my face into all the different positions for those facial expressions, so that during the conversation I could attempt to make the facial expression that I think the person wants me to have to make them happy. Um, what did you walk into? Um, there is the thing of Richard Bandler saying, so Richard Bandler's the guy, one of the people that started neurolinguistic programming. There's the thing where he says that someone came onto his one of his courses and said, "Oh, you think you're so clever? I hear you can even make people walk through walls." And he says, "Well, yeah, I can." He says, "Go over to that wall, face towards it, believe you can walk through it, and then walk really fast towards it." And so the guy walks really fast and whacks their head on the wall. He says, "No, no, no. You've got to really kind of believe that it's possible to walk through walls, and then walk through the wall." And so he does it again, and he walks and whacks himself on the wall, and he keeps doing this. And then Richard Bandler says, most people go to the door and open it and walk through it, um, after they've headbutted the wall a bunch of times. Um, well, for advice for healthcare workers in relation to self care, I think it's obviously a very difficult situation. I know that if I was still doing my old job, I would have refused to go into work right back on day one of I couldn't care less about what people think of me. So I just have a kind of like, at this point, this is what my actions will be. And so I'd had a point in my head where it was like, if in my area it looks like things are at this level of being bad, then if I was in my old job, that's the point that I would have said, I'm sorry, but I come before uh, other people in terms of like um, who I look after. There's myself and Abby, and then other people are after that. And so I would have at that point said, no, it will not happen. I'm not coming into work, because I know I would have been in a key worker role. I would have had to go into work to go and support families in a sort of social work kind of setting, and that just wouldn't happen. And that's just me. So I can understand that those who perhaps think I ideally don't want to be doing this and yet are doing it, that's got to create a lot of anxiety and kind of conflicting thoughts and emotions or whatever. Um, the main thing is obviously finding something for yourself that can help you to relax. What I would definitely also be doing is working on things like visualizing about boosting your immune system and stuff like that. There's no guarantee that it would help. Um, Visualizing boosting your immune system does actually boost your immune system, but obviously specifically in relation to the current situation, um, you don't have a built-in defense. So there's no guarantee that having a boosted immune system necessarily is going to um, help, but it shouldn't do any harm. Um, so I would definitely be doing that to make sure I've got a boosted immune system to help me out. And it was because of things like that that obviously I reshared my boost your immune system track um, on YouTube, so that there's something that can hopefully give people a bit of a better chance. And obviously, uh, stress reduces your body's ability to be, or prolonged stress reduces your body's ability to be kind of fighting invaders, so to speak. Um, and so I would want to be doing a lot of relaxation and focusing on what I always do. This doesn't just go for the current situation, but just for life in general. Is I frequently have written down basic emotional needs and think, how are they getting met? And I do that when I have worked with clients. I'd be looking at the basic emotional needs, and I'd be constantly. I carried for years. I used to carry a little card around in my wallet, so that whenever I'd be arriving to see a client, I would just glance at the card, remind myself of um, sort of the basic emotional needs that we all have, so that I can then remind myself, keep an eye out for these and whether they're being met, overmet, undermet, inappropriately met, etc., so that you then know where to help to make an intervention. And I would do the same for myself. So it'd be a case of how am I giving myself a sense of control in this situation? How am I making sure that I feel like I'm contributing? How am I making sure that I feel like uh, I'm taking heed of my own mind body uh, sort of responses, etc. So I would be checking all that out. I don't do any therapy as far as possible. The only times I do therapy really are when it's at a training event where I'm teaching something, and so I do a demonstration with someone in front of an audience. I don't take on any clients or anything nowadays. Um, and obviously, as I frequently kind of talk about, I'm trying to back out of any link of me being associated with things like therapy as far as possible. Yeah, the bit at the opening, so this is back to the hypnotic assassin, is far less. Uh, Depends what part you're classing as the opening. There's the baby that gets killed quite near the beginning, um, so that's not really a spoiler. The baby gets killed reasonably quickly. Um, so yeah, the violence that happens in that first session I did, the first reading, the first hour of the book, there is more by the third one and the fourth one, that's worse or more graphic, maybe. Glad my voice is calming. Yeah, that was filmed back in 2009. It might have been filmed a bit earlier than that, but it was shared on Facebook in 2009. Um, so it might have been 2008. The flat I was in, I lived in from 2007 to 2010, I think. So it's somewhere in that. I know it. I shared it 11 years ago, so I know that it's before that. But that's back when I used to do things like having an echo on my tracks and things. So that echo, obviously talking on the uh, into that microphone. That's the microphone I used to be using attached to my computer that I used to be using to record my tracks back in those days. Back in like the videos I used to upload in 2007, 8, 9 ish. Um, Writing a book, but it's getting hard. Do I have any ideas? Um, Probably not, because I think everyone writes in their own unique way. I can only write a book if, okay, there's two things. So I'll talk about fiction and non-fiction. So if it's non-fiction, then I essentially map it out either in PowerPoint or sometimes a mind map. So my Look Into My Eyes book, I used a mind map. I created a mind map, say, of my life periods coming off each sort of strand of the mind map. And then I broke that down into what was going on for me during that period of my life in relation to autistic traits. And so I then broke that down into, right, so there's that trait. Well, what happened in my life then? What stories could I tell that are about that trait, that kind of like social communication difficulties? So I then would have strands coming off of that. And then what about things like sensory overload? Well, I'll have some bits coming off of that. And so that's how I did it. And then I wrote probably almost double the amount of book than the book ended up being, um, because the editor obviously, I just said, cut it so it doesn't annoy people. Um, so the editor did that. So that one was done with the mind map. With my hypnotherapy books and my books on parenting and my books on kind of all other types of non-fiction subjects, I pretty much just create a PowerPoint of as if I was teaching the subject, and then I kind of move the slides around to, oh no, I'd like to teach that earlier than I'd teach this, and I, a lot of the stuff that obviously I'm writing about is stuff that I have taught. So then that makes it even easier because I already have the PowerPoints there anyway, or at least course notes and things from when I've taught these subjects. And I also know what order I want things taught in because I've already been there and done that. But I create the PowerPoint essentially first, and then each page of the PowerPoint already then makes up a chapter and a bunch of stuff that has to be covered in that chapter. So I make sure that's on each PowerPoint page. And so I've then got a chapter, a bunch of stuff to cover on that chapter. So it's like section headings within that chapter is each bullet point of the PowerPoint. And then obviously a bunch of paragraphs will be written about each of that. And then once I've created the PowerPoint, I just copy and paste the whole thing into a Word document and separate it out so that each PowerPoint heading is the top of a page. And then I create subheadings for each of the bullet points that were in that PowerPoint. And then all I do is I write the book going through, filling in just writing into all the spaces. So I find that makes it really, really quick. I said, I don't know, a few weeks ago, that the fastest I'd done was writing, I think it was 25,000 words in a day. And that's a very, very, very slow rate of writing. Um, it was something like 25 words a minute or something. But I started writing at kind of 5 a.m. and finished writing at about 3 or 4 a.m. the next day. And apart from going to the toilet, I didn't take any breaks. I just literally sat and wrote. So that's why it's harder for me to necessarily give good ideas, because that's how I do it. And it may not suit someone else. I can't be one of those writers that says, I'm going to sit down for 30 minutes a day and write a little bit. So I know some writers that say, every day I sit down and write 500 words. Well, for me, I can't do that. I can't sit and write 500 words. Nowadays, now that I type a lot faster than I did back then, 500 words would be written in a few minutes. And, that's kind of like a Facebook post for me. 500 words be written in a few minutes. And so potentially, and so I would then think, well, I haven't even got into what it is that I'm doing yet. So I'm someone who needs to say, right, today I'm going to get absorbed in this, get absorbed in the world of that writing, and just go and do it. I'll be surrounded by, I'll know, because I've done the bullet points and everything already. I'll know, for example, right, in this chapter, I need to cover these points. That means I need research that backs up these points, assuming it's a book that is going to have the references. And so I'll then be going, and before I start writing, I'll go and find a whole bunch of papers uh, and journal articles and things on that topic. I'll go and find lots of books on that topic off my shelves. I'll have a stack of it all next to me, and I'll know, right, everything that's next to me there, I have to read as part of writing this chapter. And then I'll kind of almost speed read or skim read, so that I'm just getting a gist of everything that I need to read, and then have an idea of what's within everything. And then I'll write the chapter in that sitting, and say over 6 or 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever. And while writing, I'll then, if I've remembered exactly where a reference is, when I get to the point of needing the reference, I'll quickly then just look at how the reference needs to be written and then include that. So I'll look at the journal article, or I'll look at the book or whatever. If I know it's next to me among everything, but I don't know exactly where, then towards the end, I'll go through everything. Sometimes I'll highlight it in blue on the computer screen, so that I know, right, I've got to come back and put a reference in here. So I'll highlight that bit in blue so that I can find it quickly and easily. And then when I read it, I'll think, right, I've read that. I know I need this reference for this bit. And so I'll then quickly find the reference. So if I think it's going to take me a bit of searching for the reference, then I do that. If I know I just have to go and pick up the title so I can look at the details for the title, like, the authors, the title, the year of publication, etc., then I just do it straight away. But what I don't want to do is ruin my flow. So I don't want to end up being distracted by having to constantly stop and search for finding the references, or being distracted because I suddenly go and check Facebook, or I suddenly go. So I can't do any other work or anything else when I'm doing that. I can't look at my phone. I can't answer my phone. I have to have it on silent. I can't look at any other web page, because that will distract me and take me out of that zone of just cracking on and doing the work. And if something crops up that makes me lose my flow, it could then take me weeks, months, years, or never to be able to get back into that flow. So there are books that I've started writing that I've lost the flow because something's happened that's meant that I haven't been able to keep doing what I'm doing. And so it's just never happened that I've got back into the flow for that specific book. And so I just move on and forget about it. With fiction, I can't write the fiction if I know the story. So I can't do the same process. I can't mark out, here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the end, here's the characters and what they're going to be doing. I can't mark it out like that, because now I know what happens. I can't write it And that's the same with my sleep meditations. So I always point out, don't give me ideas that are essentially the whole story, because then I can't do anything with it. Because to me, your sentence is the story. There's nothing more for me to add. So if someone says, "Oh, could you do a story about, I don't know, someone getting onto a spacecraft and flying to a strange land and finding aliens there and making friends with those aliens?" Well, you've already done that. You've told me the story. I don't need to do it. I can't. My brain now has shut off from that. It's got a beginning, middle, and end. There is nothing for me to tell. I can't do it, and that's why that kind of idea just doesn't work for a suggestion to me to have as part of a sleep meditation. So if you wanted, say, spacecraft, you would have to just put the word spacecraft. If you want aliens, you have to just put the word aliens. If you want an alien planet, you would just put, say, planet, because then my brain will figure out how it becomes a story. And I'm then an observer on it becoming a story, and that helps me to do it. And that's the same with my writing. For example, with the Hypnotic Assassin, I knew there was an assassin, and the question was, he's dumped into this world. What happens next? Where does he live? Now my fingers tell me where he lives. What does he do? What's his life like? How's he a hypnotic assassin? Where do they come from? So my fingers answer all the questions. I'm not involved in that. I'm an observer watching it play out. And again, I can't do that in small bites. I wouldn't be able to say, today I'm going to write 500 or 1,000 words, and then tomorrow I'll write another 500 or 1,000 words. It has to be, I'm going to sit here and spend literally the next 15 hours or whatever solidly being absorbed in this world that's appearing before me, and then perhaps fall asleep, wake up the next day and do another 15 hours of it, and do that until it's all completed. You can always go back and edit and stuff afterwards, but then you've done the whole thing. But I'm imagining that, given that it's not the advice in most of the writing books that I own, I'm imagining that that's not how most people kind of work. I've kind of done that. The how can you stay awake for this video type thing. Um, I haven't done very, very long ones, so I have been tempted to kind of do, um, here's a 3-hour video, see if you can stay awake till the end type thing, and make it a challenge. I haven't done one that long yet, but I've done, like, half an hour or 45-minute long ones. Some of them I say, don't fall asleep too quickly, try not to fall asleep to this, and I do all the hypnotic language, but I'm constantly saying stay awake, but implying fall asleep. Yeah, I did it because I thought, oh, people eat up challenge videos. No one ate up mine, um, but that's why I did it. But that is going back like 2 or 3 years. I think 2017 or 2018 or something. Yeah, there was a video over here, a TV advert for Cadbury's Dairy Milk chocolate bars, where the kids in the chocolate bar advert would move their eyebrows to fast music, but they were fake. It was like digital eyebrows doing it, sort of computer generated images of their eyebrows. And so I did a video on my YouTube channel, as some of you might know. This is going back probably to about 2008 or something. I did a video on my YouTube channel to fast music, fast dance music of me stood in front of a tree. I filmed it on my mobile phone, of me stood in front of a tree doing exactly the same thing, pointing out I'm doing it with no CGI. I'm actually just doing this. Um, Now I'm less likely to want to do too much of it, for the same reason you've mentioned there about no Botox. Um, yeah, definitely not an actor. Um, because obviously, as I get older, I'm aware that the more you actually move your muscles, the more you create wrinkles and deepen them. If someone had told me when I was young, if you don't smile, you'll look young forever, I would have happily have just not learned about facial expressions and trying to fit in, and instead um, just not smiled. In the same way that if someone had told me when I was a teenager that getting sunburnt isn't just a bad, uncomfortable thing, but actually causes damage to your skin that can age your skin and give you like sort of patchy skin and stuff when you're older, I would have avoided the sun far more. So there are things that you just think, oh, why did no one actually mention that when you're a teenager? With things like facial expressions, it doesn't come natural. So when I went for my uh, autism assessment, I went in. My mum came with me because obviously you have to take someone with you who's known you since very young childhood, or ideally they have to come with you. There are workarounds if you don't have someone in your life who can do that. So mum came with me, and mum tried to convince the psychologist that there's no way I could be autistic because I'm, you know, too kind of perfect for that. I never cried as a child. In terms of like when mum would leave me, I wouldn't care in the slightest. Um, and yes, I wasn't a huggy baby. She was sort of saying, I hung there like a sack of potatoes. But she was saying, but maybe that was because his nan kept on wanting to help with the parenting. She was saying he can't be autistic because I used to describe him as my little scientist. That by the age of 2, he was talking and he was already acting so grown up and so kind of. He would work out things that I associate, that she was saying that I would associate as being like things scientists do. He seemed to be very experimental in like trying to solve problems and things like that. And so then the psychologist kind of said, "Yep, everything you're describing is just making it sound like he is autistic." And you're trying to sell this as being this is my evidence that he can't be autistic, because at that point she was blaming herself, thinking almost having that kind of if he's autistic I've done something wrong kind of mindset. Mum then left the room and I uh, started talking. I hadn't really said anything at that point. I started talking to the psychologist, and the psychologist then said, okay, well, you're definitely autistic, but we're going to do the assessment anyway. And I said, how do you know I'm definitely autistic? Because apart from what mum said, obviously they did have all my written stuff that I'd had to submit. But apart from what my mum said, based on what I'd portrayed in the meeting, I thought, how on earth do you know I'm autistic? Because I try really hard to do the right body language and do what is expected of me in situations. And she said, yep, you've got impeccable nonverbal behavior in terms of hand gestures, matching exactly, in fact, over matching, being too perfect um, with what it is that you're saying. You've got perfect kind of, I lean in, you lean in, I lean back, you lean back, all the sort of matching mirroring stuff. She said, but you've got no facial expression. You've had kind of a deadpan face on, regardless of whether you're or anyone else is talking about happy things, sad things, um, whatever people are talking about, and whatever you seem to be talking about, you're not getting the facial expressions. You're sometimes getting smiling and stuff, the sort of overt stuff, but only when it's like on your terms. So only when, like, if I'm talking about something where I know I need to smile while I'm doing this. And so I then will smile because that's what I know I need to do to portray what I'm trying to portray in that moment to the person. Um, but she said, you're not like when I'm talking about something that should make you smile, you're not smiling. When you're answering about something I've asked you, which should then make you smile, but you haven't been able to plan it beforehand. Like, you haven't been able to think, I'm going to talk about this and then plan how you're going to respond. You've having to respond in the moment. You're not, yeah, you've just got this neutral facial expression all the time. Um, and so that's something that, I'm in my 40s, and a lot of the time, unless it's an artificial situation where I'm in control of me and how I'm behaving, it's largely I have a very unexpressive way of being, especially things like facial expressions and smiling. Um, but you can learn to do these things. So, as I'd mentioned, I would practice in front of a mirror for literally hours and hours and hours a day as a teenager, trying to smile and pull back my ears so that it pulls the muscles back around the side of my eyes so that it triggers the crow's feet that make it look like a genuine smile. And I'd practice that and practice it and practice it. And I would learn, I'd study, right, what is the exact kind of, and this is what kids should be taught, in my opinion, which I talked about all this obviously during Autism Awareness Week. This is what should be taught to children and teenagers, not here's a round smiley face, a round yellow smiley face. That means someone's happy, or here's a miserable smiley, sort of yellow face. That means someone's sad, or whatever. It should be anatomical documents pulled out, books and things pulled out, saying, right, those muscles move when you're doing this, and these muscles move, and those muscles move, and that pulls back, and the jaw sort of comes up, and that comes down, and all that needs to be taught, and then taught how to make that expression so that you can then practice making that expression, start getting an idea of what the making the expression feels like, so that you can then do the expression kind of when you're not seeing yourself. So you can do it in front of a mirror to begin to get a sense of seeing what it looks like as well as feeling what it feels like to do that expression. And obviously it's uncomfortable and it aches and stuff initially, but then you end up reaching a point where you now know that you can probably do it even without a mirror. And so you start doing it in conversations and things where you're judging the situation to be right. So they need me to smile now in this moment, or I'm about to, like, everyone gets taught, when you're on the phone, smile so that your voice sounds happy. Um, and so you do things like that. You think, right, that's what you get taught. So I need to smile while I'm talking on the phone so that I sound happy. But if I answer the phone, which is very rare, but if I answer the phone and I've just literally answered the phone, I'm not going to be smiling because I didn't plan exactly what's going on in that moment. I haven't had time to stop and think, okay, let's take 15, 20 minutes to plan what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do this. So I'm going to put a smile on my face. I have to be able to hold that smile the whole time that I'm communicating here. So I need to be talking slowly and calmly so that I can give myself space. I need to be listening. And, so it's all kind of just practice, really. But even then, I'm in my 40s. I've literally dedicated my life to learning communication skills to try to figure out how to appear like I can communicate like everyone else, even though I'm constantly doing it by kind of active choice. And I still make mistakes and still get it wrong. And especially, like, if someone bumped into me on the street, they're not going to get a smile. If somebody bumped into me on a course or something, if there's anything, if there's any spontaneity, there won't be things like expressions because it's a spontaneous situation. I haven't had time to rehearse and prepare and make sure I'm going into this. And that's what I always point out when people say, if you're autistic, how can you do therapy, for example? And you think, well, therapy isn't a social situation. Therapy is you have certain behaviors you're going to be doing and certain ways you're going to respond to certain things that clients say and do. And you learn how to do that and what you're doing and when. People say, how on earth can you give talks? Again, you talk at people, they ask questions, you either know the answer, in which case you answer, or you don't know the answer, in which case you say, I don't know. It's not a social situation. There's not a two-way thing. And you can rehearse, right, during this talk, at that point, I'm going to smile. At this point, I'm going to do that gesture. At that point, I'm going to do this gesture. At that point, I'm going to sit down. At this point, I'm going to stand up. At that point, I'm going to look over there. At this point, I'm going to look over the other side. At that point, I'm going to look over the heads of the audience, down, like, straight down the middle. Um, at this point, I'm going to look over there and nod my head as if someone has just agreed with me over in that corner. Like if you say, "Has anyone ever had this kind of experience where," and then you say something, and it could be no one has had that experience. So you then have planned in advance that you're going to look around as if you're acknowledging that there are people who are thinking, "Oh, yes, I've had that experience." And then you look and you kind of nod and what have you. And obviously, you see people like Darren Brown doing that on his stage show, where he'll say, "Has anyone ever had this kind of thing happen?" And then you'll go, "Yeah, and yeah." And he'll point to people randomly in the audience or in the direction of people. And obviously, if he's pointing in your direction, and you weren't the one nodding or anything, you'll just assume it's someone around you who he must be pointing towards, and it must have been them that was responding kind of affirmatively to what he said. But the reality is, it's no one. He's just saying these things. And if you watch enough of his shows, you see that he does exactly the same every single show. Like if you watch the same show again a year later, and then you buy the DVD of it and you watch it on the DVD, you see that he's done exactly the same behaviors every single time. The same, exactly the same moment. He asks the same question. He does the same, pointing to the same places in the audience. And so that's what you're learning to do. And that's what obviously your 25-year-old son would learn to do. They would learn putting tons of dedication into it. So it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of motivation to want to do it. Um, I think if I was diagnosed much younger, I may have accepted that I was autistic much younger. Hadn't heard of autism when I was a child or a teenager. Um, but my suspicion is that had I been told I was autistic at a much younger age, I would have accepted this is who I am and how I am. And I would have been me, the sort of autistic Dan, right from the start, rather than thinking, I'm weird, there's something obviously wrong with me. I don't seem to do the same as everyone. I don't seem to understand the world in the same way as everyone. And then that drives you to do the behaviors to fit in. And then since being diagnosed, I've been back to at least having a large chunk of my life where I just think, well, no, people have to accept me for who I am. If they don't like, because it takes so much mental energy every time I have to walk into a situation and I have to try and read people's faces and I have to try and read their breathing, their pulse rate and their shoulder movements and their hand movements and what their gestures are doing and how the gestures relate to what the words they're using and which words are kind of stuff they're saying literally versus stuff they're saying that actually isn't supposed to be taken literal. What about their tone of voice, their pitch, their speed of voice, watching for things like their eye movements and how they're using their eyes, how they're moving their eyebrows, how they're moving the muscles around the side of their eyes, when they've got their eyes open, when they've got them closed, when they're blinking, when their eyes kind of, their pupils get larger or smaller, watching for their nostrils and when they flare and when they pull in, watching their lips and seeing when the lines in the lips start disappearing because more blood flow has happened to the lips, when the lines in the lips appear more and they appear drier because the blood flow has flown away from the lips, watching to see how the skin color changes over time and what's going on at the time that the skin color is changing, watching where they're standing or sitting in relation to me, what angle they're leaning, whether they're copying my body language or not, whether it appears like we're in rapport or not, whether they seem to be responding as if they understand what I'm saying or as if they're interested. Are they nodding to show some level of interest in what I'm saying? Are they looking in a certain way that lets me know that, to do all of this? And then, so that's just looking. And then to be thinking, so in relation to that, I need to now be copying the types of patterns of communication that they're using. So it's not mimicking them. It's not they've just leant left, so I'm going to lean left. It's they leant left when they thought, oh, that's actually an interesting point. So if I end up going inside my mind, their pattern when they go inside their mind is to do that. So if I go inside my mind, I need to do that so that I appear like I see the world from a similar position to them. And so you're constantly then trying to work that out and think, okay, so that's the pattern for when they're introspecting. That's their pattern for when they're starting to get frustrated with something. That's their pattern for when they're comfortable and relaxed about things. So you're trying to work out all these patterns and carry all these patterns in your mind and watch all of this and hold all the information. And then you're trying to think, so I need to replicate all that, but then I also need to be congruent in what I'm doing. So I need to smile when I'm saying this, and I need to appear not so interested when, perhaps frowning or whatever when I say that. And so there's so much to go on that literally one evening out can make it so you think, I just don't want to see people for another week. That was so exhausting to keep that up. And so it's so much easier once I was diagnosed. One of the things I found easier, now I was able to be open and honest. Just say, this is me, this is how I respond. You'll either interact with me or you won't. But I don't have that problem that I used to have of thinking people are going to think I'm weird if I don't behave in this way that matches how they expect me to behave within their model of reality. Now I just think I respond how I respond in my reality, and largely people just have to accept me for who I am because that's who I am. And rather than in the old days where if I acted like myself, I would get complaints at work and I would get complaints from, sort of left, right, and center from everyone, and get told that I'm constantly behaving weird. And I'd have things like in one workplace, someone who I used to work with fairly recently said to me, "Oh yes, I remember when our managers and the directors of the company were all asking about you and asking all the staff about you, trying to find if people had a problem with you because of you being slightly odd." Um, and I just told them, "No, Dan's Dan. It's tough. If you don't like who he is and how he is, that's not my problem. I don't have a problem with him. I feel that he's brilliant to be on shift with." And she was kind of backing me up and saying how good I was as a member of staff to work with. Um, but I'm aware that people who I had passing interactions with, where I hadn't been able to prepare for the interactions at all, would see the normal Dan and not the um, staged Dan. And so my view is that so all that was obviously just about the smiling thing. Um, let's just have a look down. What might I have a timestamp for? I'll have to scroll back up again now. It jumped down a bit. Let's have a look. Yeah, my main reason for kind of obviously that I would say I wouldn't have gone into work was purely because of Abby. That it would be a case of, no, I'm not obviously going to come and bring um, like an illness home to Abby if I can avoid doing so. Let's have a look. Yeah, so I have them listed as 10 basic needs that I have down in my books. But yeah, it's kind of based on the 9 human givens basic needs. Um, yeah, I'm sure no one will intentionally try and make me laugh. I did finish up a hypno session, or I did do a hypno session yesterday, and I've done 2 timestamps. The important timestamp is the first one, 2 hours and something or other. That's where I start asking you to kind of get the idea of what it is you want to work on. But I then spent, because I was responding obviously to the live chat as well, I spent some time making sure that I was explaining this is the kind of thing you need to be working on, and not something out of your control, etc., etc. And then I've done the timestamp for when the technique itself starts, so that if you listen to it a second or a third or however many times in the future, you can just click on that because you already know how to formulate the goal that you want to work on by that point. Um, yeah, I almost never check my mail, even before all this. Just reading down. I'm aware that when I'm reading, I'm silent. So yeah, so as I said, timestamped twice for both parts, and then pinned my timestamp comment at the top of the video so that you can easily find it. Um, if the so hypnosis doesn't make anything you say any more reliable than no hypnosis. Um, what it would do if, say, a murder suspect was hypnotized to give, to come up with some kind of like evidence or to say whether they did or didn't do it, um, that would now be inadmissible in court because of the fact they've been hypnotized. And so it would be very, very likely to have accidentally led the person uh, and accidentally created false memory syndrome. So, false memory syndrome is so easy to create in everyday life. It's incredibly easy to create within psychotherapy, etc. And it's equally as easy to create within hypnosis. So, generally, as soon as hypnosis is used with someone who ends up in court, everything in relation to that is now thrown out because of the fact they've had hypnosis, and so that makes everything incredibly unreliable because they're too easily led that they could even end up believing what it is they've said, which is what happens with false memory syndrome. And that's nothing to do with the hypnosis specifically. People believe what they say when they say things in everyday life. They believe what they say when they say things in psychotherapy. They believe what they say when they say things in hypnosis. It's just that under hypnosis, it's incredibly frowned upon because that's like the ultimate easiest way of making sure someone says something and believes what they've said, even if it's not true. Um, so things people say when they're hypnotized are no more accurate. Um, People may possibly be able to recall slightly more detail about something under hypnosis, but they make as many inaccuracies and as many mistakes on their recall. Even though they're recalling more detail, a lot of that detail is equally as so. Say you recall 50% of an incident correctly outside of hypnosis, with no priming, no one questioning you. You're just recalling an event. You get maybe 50% correct. If you then have the same person questioned under hypnosis, they may still get 50% correct, um, but they might have recalled a vast amount of extra detail. Far more unlikely. It would be a bad idea, obviously, to try and do it all under hypnosis. Um, have I ever tried CBD for autism? No. Um, I generally prefer to do things without having to put drugs into my body to do it. I'd much rather for example, obviously I've talked a lot about in relation to autism about my learnings, which is why I've got all of these books that surround me, entirely because of autism and having to learn the communication skills and everything. So I'd much rather learn how to relax myself, how to focus my attention, how to do all the skills, the communication skills and everything, how to do all these things myself, so that I don't need some external agent that kind of takes control away from me to have mastered it myself. So that's just sort of my view on it in relation to me. Um, yeah, the thing I find kind of irritating about things like autism assessments, in most cases, is that it's very common, at least in my area, for people to get autism assessments, whether you're a child or an adult, to get an autism assessment, and then that's the end of the story as far as any kind of help, intervention, or anything goes. So there's a lot of parents I know who I've worked with where their child has, you know, there's a problem going on, like they're misbehaving at school, or um, there's some kind of issues going on in some context, and so they end up going to a doctor saying something's wrong with my child. That ends up leading to the child having an autism assessment. They get told they've got autism, and that's the end of, then you get sent home. It's a lifelong thing, and they get sent home, and then that's kind of the end of the help that they get. And so I've worked with a lot of parents where they end up kind of saying, "Oh, I've been told that my child's got, my child's autistic, and that it's lifelong, and that means they're never going to get better. I'm going to have to look after them till the day I die." And that's obviously not necessarily true, but the person never told them, the sort of psychiatrist or whatever, never actually broke it down and told them any of the details. Never sort of said, "Here's what you can do to help your child," etc. And the same goes for adults. For example, I went for my autism assessment, and you get told, you receive a letter. You get told at the assessment they think you're autistic. And then you receive a letter essentially kind of saying, "Yep, they're autistic, you're autistic," and then that's the end of the story. You normally just get, here in the UK at least, given a leaflet saying, "Here's the National Autistic Society's details. Feel free to check out their website." And that's kind of the end of the support that you end up getting, which I think is a bit of a pain, because what you want. So I've worked with parents where, for example, a child has been diagnosed as being autistic, and I've got involved because the parent's struggling. And then I say, "What's the problem?" "Well, my child never listens." "How do you know they don't listen?" "Well, they never look at me." "Well, how have you equated them not looking at you with them not listening?" "Well, because you look at people when you listen to them." And then I get told, "Oh, they're autistic, by the way." And then I find out, so your child's autistic, and your problem is that they don't listen because they don't look at you. So I then want to explore, what other evidence do you have that they're not listening? Because clearly not making eye contact is a normal thing for the autistic child. That's not evidence that they're not listening. That's just they're not making eye contact. And so we end up having to explore that. And the parent normally is thinking, "Oh, I didn't even know that that was a thing. I didn't know that them not making eye contact was an autistic trait and not actually a sign of them not listening." And so you end up having to teach the parents lots about autism, because parents haven't necessarily, the ones I've worked with, haven't necessarily gone out, bought books, read lots of books about autism, taken classes learning about autism, learning about autistic traits and things. They haven't done all the things that to get all that knowledge. And so I think that's where the problem ends up being, that you end up with autism assessments, and pretty much a lot of people end up being told they're autistic and then sent on their way, or parents get told their child's autistic and then they're sent on their way, and they don't necessarily realize um, about things like the lack of facial expressions, and so you need to help the person to learn that, or about things like pointing with your middle finger and actually covering that and learning about that. um, Let me just scroll back up again. Can I spot lies easily? um, if I'm trying, but not if I'm not. I generally don't pay attention to people. I don't pay attention in my everyday life. I don't pay attention. I don't look at people's faces. I gaze through people if I have to appear like I'm looking at their faces. Um, I don't. Uh, I'm not paying any attention. People could. I've often pointed out. I bet if someone says, "Oh, this incident happened," say I was a witness to a crime. Was the person, give a description of the person. The best I'm likely to do is to be able to tell you it was a person. I wouldn't be able to tell you whether it was a male or a female. I wouldn't be able to tell you what hair color they had. I wouldn't be able to tell you what eye color they had. I wouldn't be able to tell you any of their facial features. I wouldn't be able to tell you how tall they were or what size they were. I wouldn't be able to tell you what clothes they were wearing. None of that would register because I've got no interest in any of that. And so when I used to do work that involved me regularly phoning the police and having to give descriptions, I was never the member of staff who gave the descriptions, because to me, a person is like just a kind of a blur. They just are a being. I have no idea whether who I've just communicated with was a male or a female or what size they were. I don't know all that stuff. It doesn't register with me. Whereas in therapy, for example, I will be obsessing about paying attention to every last little detail on their face, in their breathing, looking for their pulse and watching for their pulse. So there's stuff that I wouldn't notice. I wouldn't know they've changed their hairstyle or something because I'm not paying attention to that. But the bits I am paying attention to, I can then ask them a question and ask them a handful of questions and then spot if they've lied. So you can ask them questions you know the answer to already. Obviously, that's generally, when you learn therapy, that's generally a rule that you get taught, is never ask something you don't already know the answer to. By the time you're asking it, you should already kind of know what the answer is going to be. And so you can ask things where you know someone is going to tell the truth, or you know what the truth is already. So if they lie, you already know they're lying because you know what the truth is. So you then see their pattern of how they respond to that kind of question honestly, and then you ask them the thing that maybe they might lie to, and then you can watch and see if they do the same kind of pattern in response on that lie. And three things I would do on the training course. One is sit opposite the person, and they've got to think two things that are true and one thing that's a lie. And you've got to just watch them, and you've got to then tell them when they're thinking of the lie versus the ones that are true. So they'll say, like, oh, it's the third option was the lie. So all you do is you watch them and you say, so you set up, you first of all say, think of something that's true, and then think of something that's true. Now think of something that's a lie. They now think of something that's a lie. Okay. Now think of, so this is the easy, kind of the beginner's way of doing it. Now think of two things that are true and one thing that's a lie. And it'll be very obvious. Two of them are one pattern, one of them's another. And because you've got these reference patterns as well that you've learned, you'll know, two matched one of the patterns and one matched the lie pattern. And so you then know it. So you don't have to do the reference one. But if you're doing this to start with, you might do the reference bit first. If you're a bit more advanced, you'll just say, okay, think of two things that are true and one thing that's a lie, and I'll tell you which one's which. And then you just watch the person, and based on your observations of their non-verbal behavior, you tell them which is the lie. The second one is now you do that auditorily. So you sit back to back and you say to the person, okay, think of two things that are true and one thing that's a lie. And what I want you to do is count to 10 3 times. So think of the first, think of a true thing. So it doesn't, not in this order, but think of a true thing and you'd count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Think of another thing, maybe the lie, for example, and you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then you'd think of the other true thing and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then based on the patterns within the voice, the job of the other person, who you're obviously back to back with each other, is for them to know, right, that was so in this case, the middle pattern was the one that was different to the other two. So that was the lie. So then you obviously tell them that, so you get the lie. And then the third one is, so you've done it visually, you've done it auditorily, and then you can do it kinesthetically. So you would touch hands with each other, kind of like that. And then you'd say to the person, you both close your eyes and you'd say to the person, okay, think of the three things, two things that are true, one thing that's a lie. And then again, they think of one, then they think of another, then they think of another. And you then say, it was the first one, second one, third one, or whatever, just based on the patterns changing within touch, within sort of what you've picked up through your hand. So you would do those sort of things, obviously, to practice spotting when people are changing patterns and potentially lying or whatever. But that's, so you can do that like in therapy. You can do that, for example, at party games and things. You can do that with friends or family or whatever, saying, okay, we're going to do a thing about spotting lying. Think of two things that are true, one that's a lie, and just by touching your hand, and you not saying anything out loud, so you're in silence and you're just going to think it in your head, I'll tell you when you're thinking of the lie. So I can do things like that, but you're actively doing it. It's not like you're paying attention to people when you bump into them in the street and you have a conversation, you now know they've lied or something. Definitely not easier to hang out with people who are also autistic, because many of the people who are also autistic I find very irritating to be around. So not all. It goes the same for non-autistic people, but I find difficult to be around because they might kind of get into my personal space, for example, where I want distance. They might start wanting to talk to me about subjects I've got literally no interest in, and they're obsessed about wanting to talk about their subject that they're obsessed about. And I don't want to talk about their subject that they're obsessed about. I want to talk about my subject that I'm obsessed about. And they might want to grab hold of my soft clothes that I'm wearing because they're soft, and I don't want them to grab hold of my soft clothes. So a lot of these issues end up that I would do, I don't want to be on the receiving end of. So I would say that I would rather be on my own 99% of the time, with occasional dabs of mixing with people who are no more than, maybe ideally no more than, say, 3 or 4 people at any one time, and even that's pushing it a bit, who are interested in what I want to talk about in that moment. So I always point out, the reason to have a birthday party isn't because you want a birthday party, it's because that the people that are there because it's your party. And so they're there so that you can talk to them about what you want to talk to them about. And you're technically, so I can literally walk up to everyone at my birthday party and talk about hypnosis to every single person. And if they've chosen to come along, they've kind of accepted, they're happy for me to just talk to him about hypnosis to them all. Although I do have birthday parties where, even when the plan is that it's kind of enforced having to engage with Dan about Dan subjects, I still will end up, if it's in a garden, going off and taking photos of butterflies and lizards and things like that, and literally will ignore for the entire party everyone who's at the party, because I've got less interest in them than I have in going and taking photos. But that's so I would rather have that. I'd rather have, right, I'm going to go along to that hypnotherapy course because I want to hypnotize people to practice my skills. And the only way to meet people where I can practice my skills is to pay to attend somewhere where I can do that. Or the only way I can practice my skills is to set up a course that I'm teaching so that I can hypnotize people so I'm practicing. And if people learn as a byproduct of me practicing and talking about subjects, well, then that's good for them. Um, so I would rather mix with people who are into what I'm interested in on a small scale from time to time. But nearly every part of my kind of interactions, I'm happier to do it in my own head with myself. I find that's the best person to interact with is myself, and just kind of keeping myself to myself. You don't have to then worry about social interactions and responding in certain ways with different people or anything. Um, you don't have to worry about the fact you've possibly upset people or you've possibly come across as rude or any of these sort of things. I have bumped into my mum in the high street before and not recognised her, and so I flatly ignored her and just walked straight past her and paid no attention to her at all. That's kind of how bad my recognition of people can be. If I had seen her, there's a very high chance, obviously, that like any sane person, you would cross the road. If you've not been seen, you would think, I've not been spotted yet. So if I play my cards right, I can duck into a shop and avoid having to have a communication with them. So most people who I see out and about, it's very rare for me to, if I think they haven't seen me, my first choice is quickly get somewhere where before they haven't seen me. So if I duck into a shop, if I go down a different street, if I turn my back to them, maybe they won't recognize me or notice me, and I can just walk away and don't have to interact with them. Um, so that's what I would do if I saw anyone I know in town or anywhere. I would do what I can to avoid them as my first option. And if I had to interact with them, that's if I recognize them in the first place. But if I had to interact with them, then I would try and keep it to a minimum, ideally. I don't really have any opinions on hypnosis while on psychedelics. Um, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to. Well, all hypnosis does is focuses your attention, and if your attention is already focused on whatever you're taking, and whatever your experience is while you're taking it, you don't need the hypnosis because the hypnosis is literally just to focus your attention. Um, so if you took LSD, for example, and then you kind of, while you've taken LSD, you sit there and are asked to focus on your experience, which is what you would do with hypnosis. You'd kind of say, take a moment to perhaps, you don't have to have them close their eyes, but you might say, take a moment to close your eyes and just begin to allow yourself to be absorbed in that experience. A lot of people, if the experience is catching enough, if the experience is novel, unique enough, or whatever, it's going to catch their attention anyway. They're going to get drawn into the experience. They don't need someone to hypnotize them for it. Oh, it's jumped down the wrong way again. But my experience is that when I'm around people who've taken psychedelic stuff, they seem to interpret the world around them and talk about the world around them exactly as I experience the world around me. And they just suddenly seem to make more sense in the way they talk about things. Yeah, I've been around people who've taken mushrooms or eaten mushrooms, and they found it very awkward, an awkward experience because of my reaction to it, treating it as if it's the most normal thing in the world. Um, yeah, I'll study others, so I'll sit in cafes, and from an educational perspective, I'll try and watch, um, kind of as an educational thing, are they how are they breathing, how are they standing, what are they doing, what are they going to do next? So when I'm doing that, obviously I'm then studying people, and aspects of people. I do get people who say that. My reason I was running a for a year, I ran a free practice group over here in well, it was in Bognor Regis because I did a lot of talks with the libraries in West Sussex, and so they said that they were happy for me to use their rooms at Bognor Library for the reduced rate. Um, but the only way I could get people to come to so I was doing this sort of practice group every single I think it was once a month or something, and a whole day group. And the only way I can get people to come to it was to make it free. So I ended up paying out a fortune every single session, and even then, I only managed literally advertising it for anyone at all, anywhere to come along to it. I only managed to get an average of about 4 or 5 people to attend, and that was saying I'm offering free hypnotherapy training in Bognor Regis. Um, Literally, we're covering lots of stuff. You'll learn what I would teach if I was teaching my diploma course. Um, if you keep coming and attending session after session, and despite it being free and despite me attempting to get people all over the place to come along to it, I only managed to get about 4 or 5 people on average to attend. Sometimes just one person or two people would attend. Um, and so I stopped it after a year or so. I thought, no, not going to happen. And then a hypnotherapy friend of mine's who was coming along to these said, look, I'm in London. I'll set it up at a university in London if you come up and teach it in London. And we'll see if, there's no way that students wouldn't attend something when it's essentially um, in London, it was going to have to be paid because I couldn't afford the fees in London for the rooms. But it was only going to be like a really small, I think it was like 25 or £30 or whatever it was a head for like half day or whatever it was of training and having that every single month. And we couldn't get not enough people in it to cover the costs. Um, so again, I stopped sort of running it. Um, but yeah, but some people do occasionally sort of say, oh, I'll pay to come and uh, practice with you. But then that's almost like someone paying to be a client. And I would just think, no, I'd rather not interact with people. Um, you read caffeine as cocaine. Yeah, that would be a slightly different conversation. What was awkward wasn't that I was the person not doing the drugs, but it was the fact that I was treating what they were doing and the way they were around me as being the most normal thing in the world, and they found it a very unnerving, unusual experience to have me being so deadpan. Because when someone's kind of doing a weird sense of wonder thing, I've got, oh wow, have you seen this? Have you seen that? And they're kind of over the top, and I'm just thinking, well, yeah, that is kind of how it is. I don't really get you. Yes, it looks like that. I don't kind of grasp this, and I'm agreeing with them, and I'm saying I'm sharing their reality almost, except that I'm not having the same sense of wonder and awe at this reality in terms of my reactions as they are. And there was that mismatch that they described how that unsettled them and made them feel really uncomfortable in their experience, because I was joining them in their reality as it being the most normal thing in the world, but it was so normal to me that I didn't have the, oh wow, look at this, look at that. It was like, yeah, that's what it's like. I don't really get what you're so over the top in awe about. That's like normal. And so that was the bit that for them on the drugs, and a number of people have said this to me, different people doing drugs, that it ends up being an unusual experience because they can tell that I seem to be joining their reality, but I'm not reacting to the reality as they do. But I'm still accepting the reality as if this is the most normal reality in the world. Yeah, they when I was running the events in Bognor, I ran them years ago. I ran them in Littlehampton, and which is kind of 15 miles or whatever down the road, and no one, or very, very, very few people attended. There was about, some days there was maybe two or three people, other days there was five or six people. Um, so not many people attended, and myself and a friend were offering it 100% free. We just said, this is just, to explore consciousness, to explore hypnosis as a subject, to explore reality, etc. And we'll facilitate, but it's to kind of experiment with the mind almost. Almost no one was interested. Then I stopped it for a while, and then I moved it to Bognor, and did the same again. Said, but this time, instead of it being a once a month 2 hour session, it was now a once a month 6 hour session, on like a Saturday. And again, there were some international people who kind of said, "Oh, if I was in the UK, I'd love to come along to that." Um, but it's too far from the States, or it's too far from Germany, or it's too far from Australia, or whatever. And but I've never been particularly popular actually physically in the UK. So no one was interested, or very few people were interested in the UK. I obviously announced it all on my Facebook group, my hypnotherapy studies Facebook group. Um, very few people were interested and took me up on the offer, despite me saying, obviously, this counts towards your continued professional development. Um, uh, the General Hypnotherapy Register, which is a hypnotherapy organization over here in the UK, they sent it out to all of their members saying Dan Jones is running these free events. Didn't get anyone interested from that, and it counts towards your continued professional development. Didn't really get any interest from that. So pretty much not. Well, I had tried. That was one of our thoughts. Maybe not charging meant that people weren't interested because I didn't charge. Um, so when I ran it in London and you had to pay to attend, one of our things was, maybe it's in an obscure location. It's easier to get to London, for example, than it is to get to Bognor Regis. It's not much. It's not exactly difficult getting to Bognor, but we thought that, and then we thought, and also maybe because it's free, people aren't attending. So that was when a hypnotherapy friend of mine set up the London ones, and I travelled up to London. He met me at Victoria Station and would get me across London in one piece, and then get me back to Victoria in one piece afterwards. And So I ran it in a university up in London, and again, pretty much no one was interested, and that was a paid one. So people were interested in terms of uh, we were taking bookings via whatever the group thing is, the Meetup, via Meetup, and on Meetup you can show interest and you can then attend, kind of, actually pay to attend. And we had a free account, and so the interest part would fill up literally straight away. It would fill up with people claiming interest, but then no one could book on it because no one else is allowed to try and book on it when full interest is on Meetup. And so we were then having to constantly say, if you're not attending, we're going to unsubscribe you from the showing interest list, because obviously if you're not attending and you're taking up spaces on the interest list so that no one else can attend, it can't run. So we kept on having to unsubscribe all of the people from the Meetup list to give people a chance to actually pay to attend. The Meetup list would then get full again rapidly with people saying they're interested in attending, none of whom would pay any money to attend, and then we'd have to keep unsubscribing them again. And we tried all sorts of things. We tried, again, we had the general hypnotherapy register, tell everyone that this was running, um, and trying to promote it and make it like, you really should check this out. It's a great opportunity, etc. And yeah, we just couldn't get the numbers of people interested. A bit like here, there's kind of a core group of people that are interested who jump in and join in, but you then think, right, let's take it to the next level and have more people interested. Let's get it to 100 people who tune in to listen to Dan talk about rubbish, and it doesn't happen. And so it's that kind of thing where it's like, we've got these 3 or 4 people that would jump at the chance to come and join me live. So that's UK people that would come and join me live, and no one else. And so then those people are thinking, but it's so good. People don't know what they're missing. We'll organize it for you because it can't stop. And so they would then organize these things for me. I would then say, okay, you do the organizing, so all I have to do is turn up, run it, and go again. And so I did that, and then after it failing for a number of years, I just obviously decided it's not worth the hassle. I'm doing it obviously to try and be helpful. Of course you're enough for me. I'm using it as an example. So yeah, just reading. Yeah, Nan was very nervous, obviously, even though it's literally talking on a cassette tape back in the 90s. She was very nervous, thinking, oh, but my voice will be recorded. What if I sound wrong? What if I don't sound like I'm dressed right? And all this sort of weird stuff. Yep, I would get choked up talking about them because I'm aware that one's dead and one's dying. Um, I don't do any hypnosis sessions with anyone now, as far as possible. I have done online ones. The main thing is being aware of all the usual safeguarding stuff that you have to be aware of, like the fact that, um, you know, do you know that the client is safe? Do you know that the client has given you their accurate address of their location that they are when they sort of during this online session? Do you know how to get the emergency services to them in an emergency? Um, do you know uh, kind of what would happen if the internet suddenly goes on one or the other of you, and things cut out or whatever? um, what is the protocol for that? Do you potentially have their telephone number so that you can telephone them? And even then, if they've got their eyes shut and so their phone is probably on silent so that it doesn't distract them, um, have you set something up to make sure that they can open their eyes on cue? Um, so there's a lot obviously to consider. I find that a lot of people on the receiving end generally think, oh yeah, I'm more than happy to have online sessions. Um, it's more about the fact that it's frequent that therapists don't think about the sort of risk assessment side of things. Nope, Nan hasn't heard the recording recently. She's got Alzheimer's and barely knows who I am. Um, I think she kind of thinks that I'm somehow kind and related to her, but she's very good at being vague so that she doesn't quite give away whether she really knows who you are or not. It's just polite. But yeah, so I think most therapists don't really know or understand around the whole safeguarding thing and making sure you've done robust risk assessments around safeguarding. So, for example, say somebody is experiences domestic abuse and they've never disclosed this to you, and then it perhaps turns out that something on a session ends up revealing that they're saying and doing things based on the partner who's perhaps sat in that room with them at the time, or you suddenly discover that they're at risk in their home in that moment because of what they suddenly end up talking about or disclosing or something like that, or they are someone who suddenly says on air to you that they're about to commit suicide. What are you going to do if that happens? So a lot of this stuff is rare stuff to happen to any one therapist, but having worked in social care, you have to, you become very aware that you have to do risk assessments for all these things because they happen to someone somewhere at some time. And so you have to know that when it happens to you, if you're doing therapy all the time, eventually it probably will happen to you. So when it happens to you, what is your process for handling that when it happens? What are you going to do about it to make sure that the client is as safe as possible, to make sure that you're coping, as safely as possible? Like, I've had clients who've come into me and said, "Yeah, I've just come along to tell you that I'm going to kill myself, but I didn't want you to blame yourself. It's not anything you've done wrong in your therapy, but I just want you to know that." And I've had to then deal with that as a therapist there and then. Um, I've had members of my team, um, when I've done kind of family work, have, for example, one member of my team, she ended up having the dad in the family jump off of a cliff and kill himself. And we knew for weeks this was going to happen, or incredibly likely to happen. We had tried everything we could. We had uh, tried to get mental health people involved, etc. And everyone just said, no, we're not going to help. We think he's just play acting, and we don't think he's actually serious. And we kept saying we think he is serious. And then he killed himself, and we were right, he was serious. Um, and fortunately for that member of staff, I was able, and obviously others were able to help and support them. But in my private work, like the example I just mentioned about the suicidal person, um, you don't have anyone else. So hopefully you've got someone who you have as a clinical supervisor that you sort of have sessions with maybe once a month or whatever. But you don't have that same kind of support network around you as you do when you work for an organization, where the organization would have policies, procedures. They would have part of these are the risk assessments we kind of naturally do, etc. Um, and you don't have any of that. So you've got to then think, how am I making sure that I don't struggle? I don't end up wide awake at night worrying about this, that, or the other. And you've got to think, how am I protecting the person who I'm working with? as much as possible. And the reality is, a lot of what I talk about here are quite rare things to happen. But obviously, the more you do therapy or whatever, the more chance you've got that eventually something like that could happen to you in your practice. But you've got to know that you're doing thorough risk assessments and looking at, for example, when I worked in children's homes, I would literally walk in the front door and instantly I'd be thinking, okay, if someone wanted to kill me, how will they do it? And I'm comfortable thinking these things. So if someone wanted to kill me, how would they do it? So I walk in the front door. Right, they could throw something over the banister. They could hit me with the fire extinguisher. They could do this. They could do that. So what will I do to avoid or minimize these risks? And so I'd start minimizing all the risks around me. Then I'd think, for example, if I walk into the living room in the children's home, how will someone kill me in there? Well, they could throw something in here, setting fire in here, and they could tie the door handle of the living room door to the stair banisters, so that I can't, with like a skipping rope. Then I can't open the door. Um, so I would run through, literally, as unlikely as it may sound, every single example I could think of how things could go really, really bad for me. And that's, when you work in care homes, you get used to that's how you think about things literally every single minute of every single day. And you have vast numbers of risk assessments that you've actually handwritten up saying, here are the risks I've identified of things that could happen. Here's a list of all the how we would minimize those risks. And these are the things that we can't find a way of minimizing that are really high risk sort of things. Um, and so you do that in care homes, you do that when you work in social care type of work, when you're doing home visits. When you're doing home visits, you want to know, how am I minimizing risks? Like, you would never go to a home visit, go into a client's home, and you would never walk up the path and enter the home if you feel uncomfortable. You would always arrive at their home and say something like, oh, my phone just rang, but I was nearly here, so I just thought I would let you know I can't come in today and do our session. And you would leave because you felt uncomfortable walking up to their front door. I know someone who felt uncomfortable walking up to the front door, who I had openly taught when I used to teach social care staff. I had taught, if you feel uncomfortable, trust that uncomfortable feeling. It doesn't matter how stupid that sounds, trust that uncomfortable feeling. And that resonated in their mind, and they didn't go in. They made an excuse, oh, my phone rang when I was driving up. I checked it when I parked up. So and so, my boss or whatever, has left me a message. So and I can't do today's session. Like, I'm really sorry. And so they then got back in the car and left. And a few days later, the woman who lived in the house, so the mum who lived in the house, said, my husband was wanted to kill you when you arrived because of how you've been helping me to be able to change how I'm behaving, how I'm parenting, and that's making me more confident and making me believe in myself more. And he really doesn't like what you're doing, and so he wanted to get you into the kitchen, which is at the back of the property, and was then going to kill you. And so she was right to have trusted her instincts when she felt uncomfortable. And what she had noticed once she'd had the conversation with the mum is that the curtains of the living room were drawn, whereas normally the curtains are open in the living room. So you approach the house, the curtains are open. It looks like, they're starting to air the property. They've opened the living room window, etc., because you're arriving for a session and they want their house to look kind of nice. And so she had picked up on that without realizing that's what she'd picked up on. So all this sort of stuff and the risk assessment stuff is incredibly important, whether you're doing it online, where it's more about the fact that the person could be at risk on the other end, and you need to know how you're going to handle that, or whether it's when you do face-to-face kind of appointments. Like, you would never, when you see a client, if you see them in your own office, you'd always make sure your chair is always next to the door, so that the therapist should always be the one near the door that has the easy exit. So clients have to sit the other side of the room, not near the door. You sit near the door. So if the client comes to attack you, you can get out that door. If you go to their house, again, you always make sure the client sits in the room and you sit near the exit in the chair that's nearest to the exit so you can get out as quick as possible. Um, so, yeah, you ideally wouldn't have your back to people. Um, you would make sure that keys are accessible, that your mobile phone is accessible to you. You'd make sure that you don't park your car if you drive. You don't park it over a drain grate, because when you're panicking, you may well drop your keys down the drain grate when you're trying to open your car door or get your keys out to maybe get in your car and start your car. Um, if you're in a cul-de-sac or something, you always park facing out of the cul-de-sac, never park facing into it. So always turn around, face back the other way, so that you can easily jump into your car and drive straight off. Uh, get in the habit of always parking under a street light so that your car is lit, even if it's dark. So, for example, here in the UK, you could be doing a session, say, at 4:30 at night, and then the clocks could change overnight, like on the Sunday, and the next shift, you don't realize it's going to be pitch black when you finish your session and you go outside again, because of the clocks moving an hour. And so all of a sudden, you're at risk because you've parked your car in a stupid place in relation to the fact it's now dark. Um, so obviously all these risk assessment stuff, therapists get taught obviously on hypnotherapy courses, psychotherapy counseling courses, etc. But it's incredibly important stuff, and I think people don't realize it could happen to them. It's almost like people think it's stuff that could happen to someone else, and a lot of it happens from clients who you believe, oh, it never happened from them. For example, I know one person who I worked with who saw a client every session, no problem. And then on the last session, the client punched her in the face, got her to the ground, and stamped on her, and had literally just said goodbye, shaking hands with her, as sensible as every other session. And she had no reason to doubt anything. Another one is, a client had to report the parent to social services, which obviously you're always open with people, and you always say, if there are some things that go beyond confidentiality, I will not keep things confidential where it's involving safeguarding, child abuse, things like that. And that's just part of what you would always make it clear with clients. And then if you have to report a client to social services, you would say to them, I will be reporting you to social services, or I will be calling the police on you, or I will be, you're always blunt and honest with your clients about your behaviors that you're going to do. Because obviously that's what's expected of you as a professional, and you can't remain anonymous as a professional, at least not in the UK. So, this member of staff of mine had to report a person to social services. They actually were okay with this. There, as is commonly the case, that the person you actually report is okay because they know you're honest, and they know you're being honest, and they know what you're doing, and they know you've done it. But this person's whole family had flooded into their house, and when the member of staff turned up to deal with it, sort of just do a normal next session, they walked into an aggressive bunch of people that were the relatives of the woman. So you have that as well, that sometimes the risk is actually the people you don't suspect. It's like the relatives or whatever. So again, fortunately, as soon as they saw the property was busy and there was lots of people in there, they didn't walk in and get trapped in there. They made their excuses and left. So it's just, because of the sort of work I've always done, that's one thing that is very, very, that I'm very keen that therapists make sure they definitely, whatever type of therapy that you definitely follow, is that you're doing thorough risk assessments, etc., that safeguard and protect clients and yourself. So they identify the risks that could happen to a client and the risks that could happen to you, and unexpected things like the internet going down, and people forgetting or intentionally forgetting to plug in and turn on the sockets for their laptops or whatever they're using. Um, all the sort of things that could crop up. It's about kind of thinking what could go wrong and how would we minimize that stuff. Um, but yeah, I know a lot of therapists here in the UK end up saying they don't want to have to report lots of stuff because they worry um, that it could ruin the relationship that they have with their clients and all this sort of stuff. Um, and yet, it's part of what you just have to do. You have to accept that you're not there to be the client's best friend, and you're there for well-being, and you're there for the well-being of others as well. And that there are things you breach confidentiality over. There are things that supersede confidentiality in the UK and in many other countries. Um, because I know over here in one local authority, I had told all the staff in the local authority that it was relevant for. If you go into houses and you see things that are child protection concerns, you must, whether you like it or not, report it. And in the UK, unless it's imminently going to put someone at risk, you must tell the person that you're going to report them before you report them. So if you turn up at someone's house and you see something, maybe child abuse, you see maybe they hit their child or something, you have to tell them there and then, I will be reporting this to social services, what I have seen. Um, you can't keep that. You've got to have their permission, uh, or at least their knowledge that that's what you're going to do. If they refuse to give their permission, because ideally you want their permission, if they refuse to give their permission, you've obviously got to still do it anyway. But you then have to say they wouldn't give permission, but obviously it's child abuse, and they will know who did that, because if they say who reported me, social services have a duty to say so and so is the person who reported you. Um, and if it's a professional, they have a duty to reveal that professional's name. So it's better, I always point out, to have the fallout face to face about the fact you're doing this, rather than the fallout 3 weeks later when they found out that it was you that reported them, and you're walking through the high street doing normal everyday shopping with your family, and then all of a sudden that person who knows you reported them pounces and starts attacking you in the middle of a high street or something. um, so anyway, that's not particularly jolly talking, but it is very important talking, because I do feel that not enough people take safeguarding and risk assessments and things seriously enough. So I will talk for another, or engage with you for another few minutes. It seems most of your conversations have been about chocolate at the side. So yeah. Oh, I've still got some coffee. It's a nice surprise after 2 hours. But yeah, so for online therapy, there are some things that I just generally um, choose not to work with. Um, so I won't work with people with depression, anxiety, things like that over the internet, because I can't kind of, uh, there's too much high risk that something could go wrong, that that depressed, anxious client or whatever could end up having, um, other issues going on, or might have domestic abuse going on or whatever. And being, in my case, often asked to do therapy with people online across half the world. like people in America and Canada and Hawaii and um, Australia and all different places, Israel, all different places I've done therapy with people. Um, there are some things that I just think, well, I wouldn't want to have to face those issues. I'd want to kind of minimize the chances that those issues are going to come up. Um, so there are some things that I just wouldn't really sort of touch on for online therapy. But then obviously every person is different in terms of what their training is. And if you're doing online therapy, but you normally do face to face therapy, and so your online therapy is with your current face to face clients, and they're perhaps all local to you because normally it's face to face, then obviously that might change things because you'll probably have their doctor's contact details, you'll probably have their home address. Um, you'll already know how to contact emergency services in relation to your area because that's where you live. Um, you'll know which clients you may not take on new sessions because you won't know those new clients, but you may end up thinking, well, these current clients, um, I know which ones I'd happily carry on the work over the internet with, like say someone for weight loss perhaps, and looking at different things, maybe someone with lower level anxiety where maybe it's more about them just needing to be able to remain calm and focus on thoughts or bits like that, rather than it being kind of a big anxiety issue that is really extreme. And so you may be considering, like, how many sessions have you had, how well do you know the client in terms of the bit of work you're doing and being able to just support them to continue with that bit of work. You may, for example, do briefer kind of booster sessions, almost like you can't get out of your home, so between now and when we can do a proper next session, I'll just check in with you, just essentially find out how things are going, what you're doing next, being a bit kind of motivational in there to keep up the work you've been doing between sessions, not to do any therapy, but just literally um, kind of to be quite just supportive for a bit. And then, you're going to do proper sessions further down the line. So you might do like, I don't know, a 30-minute session for half the price or less than half the price or something. Um, so yeah, so you would know your own setup for what you would see as different risks or not risks, and kind of what you would do. So hopefully that's kind of helpful as a bunch of answers. Um, what's interesting in these live discussions is that I never know what path they're going to take in terms of like what topics are going to be covered necessarily. Sometimes, like yesterday, obviously, I thought, oh, let's just pick a topic and start on that topic and see where it leads us from that topic. Whereas this one has covered a range of things, from talking about drug use and altered states of consciousness to talking about autism and different aspects to do with that. Um, talking a little bit about congratulations on being entirely sober. Um, talking a little bit about uh, whatever it was we were talking about earlier. There was something we talked a little bit about, but I just answered a question or responded to a comment before halfway mid sentence and threw myself off. Um, and obviously talked about therapy and safeguarding and stuff. I think in my Dan Jones hypnotherapy studies group, I've got a PDF in the resources or whatever, the files section of the group, um, for the safeguarding course that I used to run for local authority staff and for charities and things when they would be setting up like family work type stuff. Oh yes, that was we touched a little bit on the current situation and kind of looking at ourselves. I have no idea what songs Nan used to listen to, going way, way back, like when she was young. I know that she liked the Beatles, still does probably like the Beatles. So I know what records Nan used to have because I used to listen to them. So she had things like the Beatles. She had things like uh, Joseph and His Technicolor Dreamcoat, um, and other kind of musicals. She had things like who are they? I don't know, The Shadows and Hank Marvin and trying to think about big band music and that kind of stuff. Sort of big band music and jazz bands and things. Um, so she had kind of all that kind of taste in at least the albums that she had, and I would listen to them. I used to like listening to Peter and the Wolf. That was quite a fun one to listen to. Um, and I know that she liked Katie Melua as well. It was a nice surprise to find out that she liked Katie Melua because I like Katie Melua's music, and so I have all of her music as well. And then one day around Nan's, it turned out she had the album and was listening to the album on CD. So I obviously thought, oh, that's good. My Nan likes it, independently of me. My Nan likes it as well. Um, yeah. So the only stuff we ever listened to specifically together was Joseph and His Technicolor Dreamcoat. I've never been a major fan of the Beatles. I like some of their stuff that isn't repetitive, but I think the stuff that they're most well known for, or the stuff of theirs that's most popular, is the stuff that in my mind all sounds about the same, and it sounds like someone screeching at me. It's not slow enough. It's not kind of. It's too fast for my brain to process and handle. Um, Good night. I'm going shortly as well. Obviously, I've hit the 2 hour mark, which is what I said I would go on. But yeah, so Nan's memories of things like being evacuated is the main thing that over all the years that she's had Alzheimer's is the main thing she always comes back to. Oh, did you know that so and so used to moan about the fact that I was evacuated and how bad that was, and I was always angry with her for that because I love being evacuated, and she would always come back to that, and I would always be happy just to keep listening to her waffle on about it. Um, and I've got loads of audio recordings over the mid 2000s ish where I knew that she was starting to kind of show, well, very clearly show you signs of Alzheimer's. And so I would go and audio and video record Nan and Grandad just having conversations. Um, but I kind of see my Nan maybe once every year or so, maybe less than that. Thank you for the kind words. Hope everyone is okay. Um, yeah, so I'm not really one for seeing people in my life. And obviously, right now, no one's allowed to see anyone, um, especially not elderly, because of our current situation. Um, but when I realised that Nan was definitely going downhill in terms of likely to stop remembering things, I wanted to capture as much family history as possible, just conversationally. So I would record all our conversations to try and capture as much as I could while going through photos on the floor with Nan, saying, "Oh, who's this? Who's this? What are they doing there?" And trying to get as much information as I could. So and the same with my granddad. I went through trying to get as much from granddad as well, doing the same sort of thing. Um, so, and I think that it's something you don't really appreciate enough generally when you're younger, to save the stories that grandparents tell you if you've got grandparents. people don't save the stories their grandparents tell them. They sort of almost see it as, I'd rather be doing something else, but my grandparents are telling me something. So not all young people are like that, but I think there's a tendency that people don't necessarily. My uncle sees my nan, but he already obviously plays the music that he knows that she likes, and they dance every day that he visits her. Um, so, but yeah, so I like old people's tales generally, if it's related to my family history at least. I've got every single bit of schoolwork I've ever done. That's why I've got so much junk, because I don't get rid of things. I have all of my old exercise books, all of my old school projects. Um, I did actually record over it. That specific recording, I recorded over it, and fortunately, my nan and granddad recorded a second version because they liked my uncle Bob, who's on the same recording, died not long afterwards, and so they wanted to have a recording for themselves. Um, because of the fact that my uncle Bob was on there talking about being in the Navy during the Second World War, etc. And so they had done a recording, and after I recorded over it, I went and got their copy of their recording. So that recording is from their copy of the recording. I think everyone has an Uncle Bob. So yeah, so I'd got a copy of the recording that was their copy. That is his real name. So I'd got a copy of their recording that isn't my original recording. And then since, other people have passed away and have asked me then, their relatives have said, oh, can I have a copy of that recording, my interviews with these relatives? And then I've got a World War One project that was done entirely, essentially I just photocopied lots of photos of my old family during the First World War, stuck it down onto sheets of paper, stapled it all together, and then wrote a bit about who is in each picture and what they did. And then that became my World War One project, which again was me just trying to find a quick and easy way of doing a project. But I've got that as well. So yeah, I've got literally all my old schoolwork, all the stuff. I've never understood this, people growing out of things. So I've got all my old stuff that I've ever had. So anyway, I will go and I will be back tomorrow. I'm trying to think. I was looking around to think, oh, I wonder if there's anything I can do tomorrow. So I'll go, but I'll be back tomorrow. That'll be Saturday, I think, is tomorrow, if I remember correctly, which I may not. So I'll be back here, and if I can think of a topic to start us off on so that we have some theme to start with, because I think it works quite well having a bit of a theme, talking about that theme, and then following questions after the theme. So I will do that. So good night, everyone, when it gets to your night times. And remember that, Arnie's voice. Remember that at 4 a.m. Saturday morning, so 9:30, 10:30. So in 6.5 hours' time, you've got the Daddy and Daughter's fishing trip sound effects version going live. So you can always go back and get the original, listen to the original from 2018 if you don't want sound effects. But the sound effects version goes live at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning. So 6.5 hours' time. If tomorrow morning's different for you to me. A joke telling session. What? Look at my face. I'm not good with jokes, at getting them or telling them. So anyway, see you tomorrow. Thanks for joining me over here.